Hi folks, Breadman John here again. Words. Are we ready to make bread? I hope so. Again, in case you didn't see my previous videos, I'm going to warn you, I am a 10-year Navy vet and biker. My language is not always the cleanest and my jokes are not always the best, either funny-wise or appropriateness-wise. But hey, we're going to have fun. So, going to start out this segment, we're going to talk about ingredients. Now, bread is one of the oldest staple foods that mankind has had. It's simple, it's adaptable, it's very forgiving, generally speaking. Minus COVID crazy, all these ingredients are readily available and not very expensive. So let's talk about the ingredients real quick. Number one, flour. Yeah, I'm not going to open it up and show you. Everybody knows what flour looks like. I use a bread flour. Now you can use pretty much any flour. Now, if you go into some of the exotic gluten-free flours, make sure it's going to take some trial and error because they absorb water at different rates. So that's going to be touchy. But for a general purpose bread, you can use pretty much any flour. You can use whole wheat flours. You can use regular baking, unbleached baking flour, or even bleached if you want to. This is bread flour. The reason I like bread flour, it's actually got a bit of a higher protein and gluten content. So it makes the bread a little bit more substantive. Yeast, your second ingredient. I'm going to show you this. This is a packet of yeast. Just a baggie of yeast. This is commercially produced yeast. This is dry active yeast. Basically what dry active means, it's dry, it's in a dormant state. And once we put some water and some sugar in it, it's going to start doing its thing. Another type of yeast is this. You can find this a lot of time in specialty shops. I have not yet cooked with it. But this is a live yeast, and it's kind of like a clay almost. I'm told you can use the same amount of yeast as you would with the dry active. Like I said, I haven't tried it yet. I'm looking forward to. This is my regular yeast container. Sugar, just regular white sugar. Salt. You can use whatever kind of salt you want. You can use fancy sea salts. You can use just basic, iodized or non-iodized table salt, whatever you want. And oil. Now, to give you an idea of our recipe, I have this jotted down in my kitchen because I have the memory of a gnat. This is my basic recipe for a 4-loaf batch. I actually get 6 loaves out of it. It's based on 4 2-pound loaves. I make my loaves a little smaller usually. 4 cups of water, 8 tablespoons of sugar, 8 teaspoons of yeast, 1 cup of vegetable oil, 12 cups of flour-ish, and 4 teaspoons of salt. Now, the reason I say ish on the flour is the amount of flour you're going to put in is really going to depend on how your dough is behaving. You can take that down into a single loaf if you want to. It's actually based off of a single loaf recipe. The single loaf recipe would be 1 cup of water, 2 tablespoons of sugar, 1 package of yeast, which is about 2 1/4 teaspoons, 1/4 of a cup of vegetable oil, 3 cups of flour, and 1 teaspoon of salt. So you might ask yourself, well, if I am just using that basic recipe and scaling up, why doesn't the yeast seem like the right amount? The reason for that is your yeast amount is actually kind of flexible. A lot of times in smaller batches, you'll use more yeast than you would in larger batches because the smaller batches are more for time. You're trying to get it done quick. Larger batches, it's more about control. So you can reduce your yeast amount and that'll help you control it and time your rising and resting and stuff better. So let's get started. Now, the first thing you want to do, honestly, when you're baking bread, this might sound stupid. Take off your jewelry, wash your hands. I've already done the hand washing. I'm sure everybody knows how to wash your hands. If you haven't, there's videos all over the internet on how to do it, especially right now during COVID crazy. Wash your hands. Wash your hands, wash your hands. So we're gonna start with our dry ingredients. So we're gonna take our 8 teaspoons of yeast. I keep my yeast usually in a Ziploc bag in an old coffee container. Yeast does not like light. It doesn't like heat. So until it's time to become active. So 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And now that I've shown off this bag, I can stick that in the container too. And 8 tablespoons of sugar. One, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, now, yeah, I'm not like those fancy French, what do they call it, the mise en place or whatever the heck it is, where you get everything all lined up in your little bowls and everything ahead of time. Oh, and I'm also not at all organized, because there was one other thing I wanted to show you. As an option when I was talking about yeast, and introduce you to Seymour. Seymour is going to hopefully be a sourdough starter. The reason I call it Seymour, and for those of you that are fans of the show, I'm sorry. I know it should be Audrey, but I call it Seymour because I got to feed it every day. It's just a very basic mix of flour and water. No yeast, no salt, nothing else. You see the bubbles in it. That's the natural yeasts from the air and from the flour itself that are starting to do the fermentation and rising. I haven't had success with this before. I'm crossing my fingers now because I want to make sourdough. I love sourdough. So anyway, that's another option. I've heard other options too. If you can't get dry yeast or the block yeast like I have, there's other options out there. I have made bread in the past. I don't usually do it, but I've made bread in the past using beer, because beer has yeast in it. I've heard you can boil potatoes like you would as for mashed potatoes and save the water, and that can be used in place of a dry yeast and regular water. Okay, so with that said, I've got my yeast, I've got my sugar. Now, this is probably one of the most critical parts of bread making. Bread's very forgiving, but your yeast has got to activate right.
Do you have to swirl and mix ahead of time?
You don't have to swirl and mix. It's just something I do to kind of get it all together. You're going to want one of my tools that I forgot to pull out. A whisk or something, a spoon. And you're going to want water. Now, your water temperature is pretty critical. You want to shoot for water to be about 110 degrees. About 105 and below, the yeast won't activate. 120 and above, it'll kill the yeast, so it won't do its thing. So we're going to add our 4 cups of water. And we're going to mix them up. You don't have to be violent with it. Just kind of make sure that all of the yeast can get to water and sugar. Then we're going to cover it up. So let's talk about what we're doing here. A lot of people don't understand what yeast does. So here's one of those places where I get a little bit not fancy. Yeast is a living organism. And basically, what it's going to do is it's going to eat the sugar and it's going to fart carbon dioxide. Yeah, I know it sounds really pleasant, but that's what it does. That's what makes your bread rise. That's what makes all the little holes and stuff, the little tiny holes in your bread. That's what it's coming from. I cover the yeast because, again, yeast doesn't really like light. And it does like to be warm in order to work. So cold for storage on yeast, warm for activation. We're going to cover it for about 10 minutes. And then if we proved it right, if everything's, if the yeast gods are smiling on us, we'll see a nice frothy head when we come back for it. And we'll be ready to move on to our next steps. Okay, welcome back. Yeah, I know. Time didn't seem to pass for you guys at all, but it's been 10 minutes. Okay, so let's take a look at how our yeast did. Okay, that is some happy yeast right there. Very happy yeast. Nice and active, foamy, bubbly, doing exactly what we want to do. So, we're going to put it in our bread bucket. Now, before I do that, real quick, and I'm going to say this as a disclaimer, there's a lot of different ways that people make bread. There's a lot of different recipes that say do it this way or do it that way. I'm not saying my way is the only way that's right. I'm just saying this is the way that I learned how to do it. We've got our bread bucket. While we were gone, I washed it and let it sit in some hot water for a little bit. I like to do that to warm it up some because, again, when we want our yeast to be active, we want it to be warm. So that way we don't cold shock it. I don't know if it makes a difference, but like I said, that's the way I learned to do it. So we're going to put our yeast in. Now, I have seen a lot of recipes that say to put the salt and the oil in with the yeast when you proof it. I like to wait till after. Again, figure out what works best for you. So we got 1 cup of vegetable oil. That's the step that I always seem to, like, if I forget any step, that's the one that I forget. I don't know why. Hang up. And we're going to do 4 teaspoons of salt. Now, my grandfather, when he taught me to make bread, he was pretty amazing. The only thing that he measured out was his yeast and his sugar, and the water, of course. Everything else he did just by knowing how to do it. I'm not that good. Maybe I will be again someday. Let's give it a quick stir just to mix all those ingredients together. And then we're going to start adding flour. Now, I use a lot of flour. I buy 25-pound sacks of flour. I bought these buckets on eBay. These are food storage buckets. Or not eBay, sorry, on Amazon. 3 of them for about $30. Again, lightweight baking, you don't really care. But if you're making a lot and using a lot of yeast, you want to kind of keep it, make sure you keep it dry, keep it infestation free. I know that sounds nasty, but there's, out here in the West you get weevils. There's other things elsewhere. Just keep your yeast clean. This is a 1 cup measuring scoop. Really handy for me because I'm making so much. You don't need it, but what you're going to do now, you remember I said about 12-ish cups. Really depends on how your mix is behaving. So you want to put about half of it in at first. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. People who do a lot of like cake baking and stuff like that are probably freaking out right now that I didn't, completely scrape the top and make sure it was absolutely level and everything like that. This is the really forgiving part about bread. So most of what you're doing now really is by eye. So we're going to start mixing it. It's going to take some time. Not the most exciting thing to watch, but you see we're starting to incorporate the flour into the liquid. And we want to get a good mix started.
Smells good already.
There's something about that smell of yeast. I don't know why, but okay. So you see that we're starting to get a little bit of a kind of a slurry going there. We're going to start adding some more yeast into it.
Flour.
Or flour into it, not yeast. Yeah. And now we're going to start being a little more conservative about adding it because we want to watch and we want to make sure that we get it where we want it to be consistency wise. You see how it's starting to pull away from the sides of the bucket, but if we let go of it, it's going to kind of just slop right back down. So that's not ready yet. We're going to keep adding some more flour and mixing it in. While I'm doing this, since this is so thrilling, well, I was going to say something, but then I realized I've already said it. So, yeah, I kind of said this a minute ago. You know, bakers are probably freaking out, people that bake a lot of cakes and stuff like that, because baking is very often you know, really, really strict. And like you get a couple tablespoons too much of flour in your mix and you've killed your cake. Bread is like I said, it's much more forgiving. You can even add, I have a problem, I'm still working on getting used to making it here in the high altitude. I tend to make it probably drier than it should be a lot of times. I'm still trying to get that right, but even at that, it still comes out good. Now we're starting to get a thicker dough going. We're still going to need a little more yeast, but we want to try and make our flour. But you see how it's really starting to kind of clump, kind of sticking to the hook. We're getting kind of close. Sometimes you see how the dough on the outside, or the flour on the outside, isn't really wanting to incorporate into the dough. Sometimes you got to punch it in, punch your dough down, remix it. Hey, dough fingers. That's going to make it start kind of changing its pattern. And we're definitely getting there. We got a little bit on the outside that doesn't quite want to incorporate into the main dough ball. Freaking rebels. Get with the program. Comply. Comply! Okay. I mean, it still doesn't want to do it, but hey, we are pretty much there. Now, yeah, you will notice there you can still see a little bit of dry flour. It happens. It will take care of itself. So, with that done, cover it up and we're going to let it rise. Now, this is the slow part of bread making here, folks. This is an hour. We're going to let this rise for about an hour. Put our cover on. Cover it back up with our couche. Again, because we're trying to keep the warmth that the yeast is generating in there, and we want to keep it nice and dark. Yeah, I know we have a cover, but this just kind of helps it. While we're going to take this quick break, let's talk about keeping your couche clean. Yeah, I know. It's a funny name, and I gotta make jokes about it, because I'm that guy. A clean couche is a good thing. Don't let your family play with your couche. Make sure they know this is just for bread making. It's not for, it's not a towel. It's not a buffing cloth for your car. It's not
the toddler's cape to be a superhero.
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, it's not anything else except for making bread. Keep your couche clean. How do you clean it? How do you care for your couche? The best thing to do, honestly, is when you're done making it, hang it up. If it's got bits of dough on it and stuff, that'll dry and kind of flake off. If you need to wash it with cold water, no soap, and hang it up to dry. But odds are you won't need to. Over time, it'll get some stains on it from oil and stuff like that. Not a big deal as long as it's cooking oil and not, motor oil.
So don't polish your motorcycle with it.
Don't polish my motorcycle with it. Wow, I didn't put my apron back on. Holy cow, what is wrong with me? Man. Okay. Hey, at least I didn't forget the oil this time.
Trade-off.
I think airing it out is a very important thing because you don't want your couche getting all yeasty. I know there's so many jokes. So hanging it up, airing it out when you're done really is important. And of course, you take care of all your stuff. I wash my all my utensils between each batch. When I'm starting the day, I wash my mixer and other utensils again before I start, even though it's already clean. Just don't want to take any chances of dust, hair, anything like that getting into food, especially if you are making it for other people. So, and again, another thing I'm going to emphasize again, wash your hands. Wash your hands frequently. Wash your hands often. Okay, so with that said, we are going to let this rise for about an hour. And we will come back and we'll look and see what we've got. Hey guys, Breadman J back. It's been an hour. Not to you guys, but to me. It's been an hour. And by the way, I've been a little bit remiss. Y'all have been seeing the dude behind the dough, but what you're not seeing is the babe behind the baking. So my wife Sarah is doing the camera work, and it's her voice that you hear every now and then on here. I really want to say thank you for all the help and support you've given me in this project. Everything from doing bread deliveries to helping manage the page to sitting here holding the camera while I'm doing this. So thank you very much.
Not a problem. Happy to help.
So now it's been an hour. We're going to take a look at our dough. What we want to see when we open this up is we want to see that our dough has roughly doubled in size. We're not going to measure it or anything, but we definitely want to make sure that it increased in size. So let's take a look and see what we got. And I think we a little bit more than doubled in size, actually.
But wait, I promise I didn't take any.
Okay, so we have happy dough. Now, one of the cool things about the quote-unquote universal bread mixer.
It smells so good.
Yeah, it does. It smells even better when it's baking. But one of the cool things about this is that supposedly you're not supposed to have to knead the dough. You can crank it again to knead the dough while it's sitting in here. And I'm going to do a real quick turn. And this will kind of punch it down a little bit.
Look at all the air that was in it.
And you'll see it's forming itself back into its ball. Now, technically speaking, we could leave it like that. But again, I go with the way that I learned to make bread from my grandfather. So what we're going to do now is we're going to pull it out of the bucket. And we're going to put it on our couche. I don't have a good couche joke for this one. So We'll pull the yolk, lift the entire thing out. Take it off our bread hook, if it'll cooperate. Nice. See how this is almost optimal. You see how it's kind of sticking but releasing? And it's kind of going back into its shape. That's almost optimal. What we're gonna do is we're gonna knead it down a little bit. Now, again, if you're doing a couple loaves for home, small, real small, no big deal. But I like using the couche to knead it down. You don't want to do too terribly much kneading. What we're just trying to do is get the worst of the big bubbles out. Oh yeah, it's beautiful. That really is beautiful.
Hey, my back could use a massage like that.
Okay, now, big mistake that a lot of I shouldn't say home bread makers because I'm a home bread maker, but a mistake that a lot of new bread makers make is they over knead it. You don't want to do that. Also, you notice I'm doing it on the couche, and I said a couche isn't necessary. What you can do instead of using a couche like this is you can put it right on the counter, put a little bit of flour down first. But where the mistake comes in when you do that sometimes is if you use too much flour and roll too much flour back in while you're kneading it, you can really throw off your dough mixture. So, but this is nice. It's happy. I'm going to kind of form it a bit back into a ball. Yeah, you see over here some of the top dried out a little bit. This is from the top of it where the air was hitting it. That's okay, because we're going to end up working it all back in again. I'm going to have a nice dough ball. And we'll lightly wrap it in the couche. Now, this is going to be a 20-minute rest period for this. And once we have that done, what we're going to do is we're going to get our bread pans ready. I'm going to go for 6 loaves on this. 2, 4, 6. And I should have pulled some of this stuff out before the video started, but hey, that's okay. I'll just walk off frame for a second. Probably technically don't need to do this with these aluminum pans. Probably don't need to do it if you get non-stick pans, but again, there's a lot of things I do out of habit from the old school way that I learned to make bread. So take a paper towel, nice clean paper towel. Take some oil. Little bit of oil on the paper towel. Okay, that was a little too much oil on the paper towel, but okay. That's fine. And you're going to kind of just wipe down the inside of your bread pans. Line them up and get them ready to go. I'll line them up after I get them all wiped down because where I'm putting them right now is going to be in the way. By the way, guys, one of the greatest things in the world for your kitchen, watch this. Alexa, set a bread timer for 20 minutes.
Bread timer, 20 minutes, starting now.
There we go. That's gonna time our rest period. We're gonna have another rest period after this. You'll see that in a minute, but just to give you kind of a heads up of what's going on. The dough's going to rise a little bit more. And then we're going to divide it up into our loaves. So once we divide it up into our loaves and we roll it a little bit to make it a pretty loaf, we're going to let it rest again in the pan. Clean, clean, clean. And so there we have it. Now we're ready to take another break. Go have another cup of coffee, watch some more Netflix. 20 minutes, we'll be back. Okay, and we're back from our first dough resting. So you might notice it grew a little more, just a little. This is very happy, very healthy. Oh, and it's farting. So we're not really kneading it per se. We're just kind of punching it down a little bit right now. Just get some of that excess air out. And what we're going to do is we're going to weigh it. Now, you might think, okay, he's got a bowl on it. How can he weigh it accurately? This cool little scale here will zero out at whatever you put on it. So once I turn it on with that bowl on it, it's going to hit 0. And we're going to check and see how much dough we have here. And about 7.5 pounds.
Yep, 7,414.
Okay. And we want to make 6 loaves out of this. So, get my other kitchen assistant. Alexa, what's 7.4 divided by 6?
7.4 divided by 6 is 1.2333.
1.2333.
So we're going to make our loaves about 1.25 pounds each. Which is fine. I'm going to reset our scale because we're going to be using it. And we'll just give it a little bit more of a punch down, and we're going to kind of form it out some. You can still, if the microphone's sensitive enough, you can still hear some of the air pushing out. Nice, happy bread. So now is where I'm going to walk off the frame for a second. We're going to get a little flour on the counter. Again, I mentioned earlier, a lot of newer bread makers make the mistake of putting too much flour out and incorporating too much of it in. It's not a huge deal, but it makes it a little bit less than optimal. So, now that we've got that done, what we're going to do is we're going to start dividing up our loaves. So we said we wanted about 1.25 pounds. This is where the scale comes in handy. I'm a little shy. You're seeing it upside down. That's awesome. And that's way too much. It's a little bit of a trial and error process. Now, this is one of these optional tools I said you don't really need to have. It's great. The dough slicer is great to have when you're making larger batches, and especially if you're making a whole bunch of batches. Normal weekend day when Breadman is cooking for the masses, I'm making about 4 batches a day. So that would be about 2 dozen loaves. And that's where it's nice to have the 2 bread buckets. Even though you saw the differences between my 2 buckets, I will use both of them when I'm in production mode. So it really is nice to have this. But again, if you're just doing 1 or 2 loaves, not a big deal. You can use a regular kitchen knife or something like that. Close enough. Okay, so we are done with our scale. Just put this out of the way for right now. And what you want to do is you want to get these formed into loaves. Now, this was one place where my grandfather completely rocked, and I wish I had his skills, but I'm nowhere near. You want to try and get everything pulled nice and tight on the outside. You'll have a bit of a seam in the bottom, and that's okay. We're going to put these back in our pans. Now, if you wanted to make a baguette, or you wanted to make a French bread, or you wanted to make a sourdough round, obviously you wouldn't be using these pans and you wouldn't form these loaves the same exact way. But for regular bread, this is what you're doing. One thing that Sarah wanted me to say that I kind of forgot to mention last time when I was talking about the couches. You don't have to have a couche, especially for a smaller batch. You can use a clean kitchen towel. You wouldn't want to roll your dough in the kitchen towel. There's a few things that I've done with the couche that you wouldn't want to do with a regular towel. But as far as preserving your heat and stuff like that, it's fine to cover with a regular towel. You'll want to wash it beforehand in cold water, no soap. Because you want it to be clean. You want it to get rid of the lint.
Not have any...
And not have soap residue. Now you see these seams here? That's going to end up kind of being a little funny looking once the loaf bakes. But one of the fun things about doing this is this is not mass-produced bread, where you go to the store and you get the bread and every loaf is exactly identical. This bread has character. Every loaf will be unique. And now we're going to let the bread rest one more time for another 20 minutes. This is a good time to preheat your oven. You don't want to deal with a cold oven. You don't want to deal with having to wait too long for it to warm up. So, what can happen if you do that, that's the last that we're going to knead the dough. It is going to rise some more, and if you take too long, it can over-rise and then collapse. So, you don't, then you end up with kind of flatbread. Not fun. Unless you want flatbread, but that's usually a different recipe. So, prep your oven, 425 degrees, and go finish your Netflix show. And we'll be back to put it in the oven, I guess. That's like a really thrilling thing to see, I'm sure. I'm pretty sure most of y'all can figure out how to put things into an oven. So,
but they're going to want to see the rising and all that again.
Well, yeah, we'll show it to you. So, okay, we'll be back in a bit. Okay, and we are back from our second 20-minute rest. And that's the end of it for resting time. Let's take a look at what we have. You can see our loaves rose again in the pan. That's good. We want to see that. We're going to have some nice, light, fluffy bread here. So, we're not going to mess with it anymore. We're going to stick it in the oven. Again, we've preheated our oven to 425. We're going to spread them out a little bit to give them some room. They're not going to grow, but we want to make sure we get good heat all the way around the pans. Thank you for not filming my butt. Nobody wants to see that. Alexa, set a timer for 25 minutes.
25 minutes, starting now.
So we're going to have about 25-minute bake time, give or take. They're all a little bit different, but what we want to end up seeing in 25 minutes or so is some nice golden brown crust on the outside, and when we thunk it, it should sound a bit hollow. So we'll be back after 25 minutes, and we'll see what that looks like. Okay, and we are back. Let's see what we got. Oh, these are some beautiful looking loaves. Golden brown, you can see the rise on them, and listen, hopefully you can hear this. These are ready. Let's pull them out. And of course, the next step is letting them cool. For the sake of the video though, I'm going to take one of these beautiful loaves, cut them open, and we'll take a look and see what they look like on the inside. Again, usually you want to do this, let them cool first, but...
And just a reminder, if you don't have an automatic oven, turn your oven off at this point.
Yeah, good call. Okay, which one should we pick?
Front middle.
This one?
Yeah.
See how nice that just pops out of the pan? And let's take a look at what we have inside here. It did tear a little bit because it's still very soft because it hasn't cooled, but look at how beautiful that is.
Yeah, it looks so good.
Okay, so we have some bread to eat. Hope you all have enjoyed this video. I think this weekend we were talking about maybe trying a couple new recipes and seeing how they turn out. That could be fun. Who knows? Could be a disaster. Could be fantastic. Who knows? Until next time, Breadman J signing out.